Listen from my music. I've heard that music going. Yeah. Hello, I'm Ed Montgomery. They call me Dr. Ed. Welcome to our Master Key class. This is the Master Key class, the key. One key that unlocks many doors. Because that's what we wanted to do. It's like a Ritz-Carlton, beautiful lobby, but you want one key that doesn't just unlock your door. Hey, I want a key to unlock the presidential suite and all the rest of them. Wouldn't that be fantastic? That's what knowledge does. Knowledge unlocks things for us. And this is a little different than we do on Sensational Sundays. This is about knowledge. It's about information. So take a moment, share this with some of your friends. People who, we're not going to be here long. Somebody who would just like to get a boost right here. Some knowledge. We're going to talk about a little history. And so share it with a friend. Not only that, you can make your comments. If you're watching this and you are not in the city of Houston, type in your city. Let me know where you are watching this from. If you're not in the state of Texas, let me know what state you're watching this from. And if you're not in the United States, let me know what country you're watching this from. That'll make a huge difference. And of course, you can comment all those good things. Let me know what's happening there. This is your first time. Let me know. First time ever watching us. Let me know. And of course, like us. Okay. Ready? Let's go. Let's go. I'm pulling this. I'm going to teach this from what I call the ability to connect in unity with other people. This is what is so important in our world today. Over the last several days and the last several weeks, well, for a while, well, last 4 years, we have been seeing this whole thing about not just racism, but the storming of the Capitol, the insurrection. We're looking at people who are talking about voting rights. Some are saying that we're not fighting against people who want to vote, and matter of fact, we want to help people. And the other side is saying, no, you're trying to take my voting right. You're trying to take something from me. And so all of this is happening right now. And you've even got networks that are saying that people are afraid of losing their God-given rights in America, their voting rights. So they are just coming right out in the open and saying, we don't want everybody importing everybody from these other countries and other places and giving them the right to vote, because it's going to take our position. You're going to take who we are and diminish who we are. And this country no longer will be just as a certain group of people perceives the country. How do we get to the understanding of unity? How do we get to where we're able to talk with each other? Let me tell you what happens here. Acts chapter 2, verse 1, it talks about, and they were all in one place, on one accord. It says, and then suddenly they heard a sound from heaven as of a rushing and mighty wind. It was the sound of it. It doesn't mean it was a rushing and mighty wind, but they heard a sound from heaven. And the reason that the word heaven does not mean above, it means the expanse. They sense this thing all around them. And whatever this was, this power, this manifestation, it says, and it not only filled the place where they were sitting, it says it filled them. And when it filled them, I believe, first of all, because they were all on one accord. They were in one place, but they were all on one accord. They had agreed to have this conversation. And as we said last time, and when they preached to all nations, people from everywhere. This is what the gospel is all about anyway. It is about the ability to reach out to other people and other nations. So you have to go back into your history. sometimes to recognize. Of course, I'm not going to deal with the entire history class because history can be quite boring sometimes. So I'm going to just only throw a little bit enough at you, just so you can kind of get the understanding of what I'm about to say. Back in the 1600s, when a boat left Europe, as a matter of fact, it's the story of Cotton Mather's, one of the first preachers to preach in this whole New England, in this new world. His father and his grandfather, what you're looking at back during that particular time in the 1600s, you're looking at, it was his family who helped bring about the birth of Harvard. Yeah. Bring about the birth, and then you go into Brown, and Yale, Princeton, Rutgers, all of these places that you have up in, of course, in New England, were established during that particular time. But what you have to grasp is during that age, people didn't separate God from everyday life. In other, well, what I mean is this. God, everybody kind of like believed in God. If you didn't believe in God, you know, they were about to burn you at the stake. You just were not, you were not a good person. Everybody believed in God. It's not like it is now. Oh, what are you? Are you an atheist, an agnostic, or you believe, or whatever? And we all are. People say, do you believe in God? The conversation opens about God. You believe there's a God? Do you believe there's a... Nobody back then opened up that kind of conversation like that. Do you believe in God? It was assumed that they did. And what happened when one of those ships had left England, it had hit a storm, and the storm was so violent that it tossed this ship back and forth, and this ship was soon in peril of hitting a very huge rock. They tried to steer the ship away from it, but when they changed the sails and shifted the sails, the wind had torn the sails to such an extent that the sails literally fell from their masts ragged and into the sea. There were no sails, and the boat was drifting toward the rocks, and everyone upon that ship was soon to be dead. And they began to pray. And what happened is they had some other sails that were on that ship. And for a moment, there was a calm, and they were able to hoist and put the new sails on that boat. And soon as they finished, then came a gentle wind, and it pulled the boat away from the rocks and took them to land. And from that point on, those people got off that boat. They got on their knees, and they thanked God that he had brought them to their destiny, their new Jerusalem, their new land, which was what they called America. And from their vantage point, this is what the hand of God had done. On the other hand, there were your indigenous people. There were your Native Americans. Here they were watching this take place. And soon as the people got off the boat, they fed them, helped them, even began to teach them how to grow food so that they would not starve during the coming winter. This was from their perspective. Everybody has a perspective. But from this point, the boat from Europe believed that God had done something so spectacular that it was up to them to make this country better. And so they took it from the indigenous people because they believed that the indigenous people were not using it. And they believed, as a matter of fact, their preachers from England told them, if the people in the country are not using the land, then you have the right to take it. Now, what do they mean not using it? because the Native Americans, they built things underground. They did not build huge structures and forts and buildings in order to dwell in. They lived not on the land, but they lived with the land. People from Europe were used to building buildings. And so their thinking was, if you don't build a building, you're wasting land. If you're not growing tobacco to be able to sell back to England, you're wasting land and wasting prosperity. So if you waste land and waste prosperity, that's what they wrote them, that it was God's will to take the land if they do not use it properly. And that's one of the reasons why they took the land from the Native Americans. But they could not do the work by themselves. The Native Americans did not work out very well. So they began to import Africans that who they believed were strong enough to work on that land. In the beginning, Africans were considered by them to be brutish, ugly. Their skin was dark, and because of this, they were beasts and were not to be listed as human beings, but they were listed as property. As a matter of fact, they were called negars, and they were listed even up under the servants. And some of the servants were from Ireland and other places, even in England, who had came over as indentured servants to help work that particular land. But if the Irish run off, if those who came from England ran off of the plantations or things of that sort and blended into the country, they could always come back if nobody knew them. And if they could get rid of that accent, claim, their children grew up, they could claim that they were considered to be white, just like those who had came from Europe, and they could pass. Because of the badge of dark skin, the Africans could not. After a while, there was the big argument whether or not the Africans should be saved or not saved, whether they were human enough to hear the gospel or not human enough to hear the gospel. And they felt this way to such an extent that they thought that if they got them saved, then on one end, maybe they would be docile enough not to run off and to obey. But what if they got saved and sensed freedom inside of them and decided to rise up? So that was always the big issue when it came. But when the slaves heard the message of what the Europeans considered the gospel, the slaves didn't really at first want the enslaved people to want anything to do with it, because they knew exactly what was going on. They were just totally indifferent. But as time began to progress, it was always an issue with how do you deal with this whole new system that was being created in order to keep a permanent underclass of those that would work inside this country from the 1600s. And it's interesting, as you move into the 1700s, people like even one of the presidents, you had George Washington, they all had slaves, but at some times they didn't necessarily believe in slaves, but yet they had slaves. Thomas Jefferson had slaves, about 200 slaves, but when some of his writings you would read that he was a man of God, but he did not believe in slaves. But Sally Hemings, which was a surrogate slave, well, not a surrogate slave, but she was a mistress slave to Thomas Jefferson, that some say never happened, but it's already documented. DNA is in. It is a fact that there were many children fathered there through a black woman with Thomas Jefferson. This is history. People in history were not perfect. There were uprisings by slaves and things that took place. People during that particular time were not perfect. We try to look back and ask the question, these were God-fearing people. What happened? Well, the message of the gospel got mixed up with the message of money. And they needed people to work. And so even Christianity was preached in such a way at times in order to say to the slave, now the Bible says, be nice to your masters, be kind to those people because they are over you in the Lord. There would be issues that God, they had pictures on the wall of Jesus, that Jesus was not dark, Jesus was light. So therefore your master, so the slaves would associate Jesus' lightness with the master of that particular plantation. And even though they would go to Jesus for help, they realized that they were begging Jesus, the master, to help them, but he may not always help them because if he was just like the master. All this was integrated into Christianity. But here is where we begin to see this thing of unity. We have to begin to preach a message now about God, who is so deep inside of us that we cannot make the separation of God from that human being. Now I know you got some look like some godless folk, and they act in some godless ways. But every human being that we meet has within them, here we go, what they call the imago Dei, or the image of God, the breathing or the breath of God. I was listening to somebody and they were talking about, and God formed man from the dust of the earth and man became a living soul. So what color is dirt? Is dirt, if dirt is black, then God, the first man that God made was a black man. And I've heard that. And I used to say, cool. But then I started thinking about it and started looking around. You go to different parts of the country, dirt's different colors. Some dirt that soil can be black and rich. But sometimes you can find dirt that is red clay down off in Alabama. You can find dirt that is also white sandy beaches. So dirt can be various colors. So you can't just say because the color of the dirt is a certain way that's how God made particular colors. As a matter of fact, it says God formed man from the dust of the ground. We don't know what the dust of the ground is. That says it formed man, which means formed the physical aspect of who you are. That's not the important aspect of a human being. Although man may not live by bread alone, but every word that lives from the mouth of God. But that's not the most important. What's the most important is that God breathed into that being. When I say breathe into man, I'm talking about man, male, female. I'm not just talking about God breathed into a male man. God breathed into mankind the breath of life. The body was created, but the breath was the breath of God. So we carry that stamp, that imprint of God. And that's why it's so important. It was, I believe it was Jefferson Davis, when they were fighting the Confederate War, when he gave one of his speeches, he stated that the slave or the black person was stamped from the beginning to be below those who were white. And when I speak of white, I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about that system of white, the system that keeps one person down, because unity is going to be so important. We cannot alienate each other, and I'm going to say that again because this is going to be so important. This is why it's time for us to sit down and reteach this gospel and reteach what Jesus is actually saying to us. And people say, well, all we do is preach Jesus. We don't preach anything else we don't preach about the outside world, or we don't preach about what's going on with, black or white or race or voting. We just talk about Jesus. Well, somewhere down the line, they were talking about Donald Trump. They were talking about Republicans. Some churches were, some churches were talking about voting. But see, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus talked about everything. Jesus at one time took some ropes and beat folk out of a temple and said, "This is going, you ain't gonna do this kind of stuff in my house. My house should be a house of prayer." So Jesus talked to different people about different subjects. He talked about things that were the news. Jesus talked about things that were in the headlines of that day. Jesus talked about all things about life. He talked about religion. He talked about how the religious system were like white as sepulchres, live on the outside, dead on the inside. So this was Jesus's message. So we just can't say, well, Jesus didn't talk about those things, so we're just talking about Jesus. What good is it to talk about Jesus and not preach what Jesus preached? Preaching what Jesus preached saves our lives. Just preaching about Jesus is a nice history lesson. And we go home and we learn something about Jesus. Whoopie-doo. But the world does not change. Our lives don't change. Look, I'll be right back. And I'm gonna close this out. But I want you to watch this for about 76 seconds and I'll be right back. Okay? All right. You thought you'd never see spring again. The cold weather, the winter, COVID, everything that we've dealt with and gone through last year and even in this brand new year. But I want to say this to you. What you plant in the ground in spring will come up into harvest. What do you need in your life? What do you want in your life? This is a moment to put your faith, your trust, your hopes into knowing that your God of the universe can do anything. This is the place. Take a moment, go to myalc.org, or you can use your cell and your text to give. I know many of you love your text to give. This is where a lot of new people connect with us. The number's right there on your screen. Not only that, but use your app. We love to connect with that. So many things are happening. Get your radio show, all these different things. Or you can go to our P.O. Box. And that's Abundant Life Center, P.O. Box 772-300, Houston, Texas, 77215. I had to get outside because spring is in the air. And you know what? Your best days are about to come up again. You gotta believe it. Whatever happens, you got to believe that. You know, I believe in circles. I believe in cycles. I believe that what we give out comes back to us. I believe that, like my grandmama used to say, what goes around comes around. I believe that what we plant becomes a harvest and it comes up. I believe that there's nothing that you don't give out that won't come back to you. You give out grief, you're going to get grief back. You give out mess, you're going to get mess back. But if you give out love, if you're able to give out a smile, you can get a smile back in life. That's what this unity is going to be about. Look, I know I just got through talking to you about giving, but this is our 40th anniversary. 40 years we've been doing what we're doing. I want you to take a moment and say, you know what? I want to give a gift today just to say thank you for 40 years. Some kind of gift that has the number 40 in it. Normally I don't do this, but 40 years doesn't come up all the time. Only once every 40 years. So we'll be soon going back into a physical building. We're preparing for all of that. So we're getting ready. I guess you can tell, you can feel it. So take a moment and use your text to give. Give something that's got a 40 in it. I believe that you won't lose it. and you won't feel as if you missed it, because it'll always come back to you in this circle, in this cycle. Look, to all the people that I talk to, all races, all backgrounds, all colors and cultures, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to some better days in your life, okay? All right. Keep using that master key and unlocking doors. All right. Okay.